Well, hello everyone. I'm Louis LaPlante, an IBM Social Business Manager, and welcome to another edition of IBM Pure Chat, where we gather experts to discuss all things big data and cloud. And today's topic focuses on cloud, and specifically hybrid cloud. Of course, with 2015 rapidly approaching, we thought we'd look forward to see what the new year will bring in cloud and hybrid cloud. But before we look forward, I thought we would look back. And what I found while I was reminiscing about the hybrid cloud atmosphere of just a year ago was that in January 2014, I found numerous articles published touting hybrid cloud as the next big thing. And this feels like a lifetime ago to me, and I can't imagine how much things will change with cloud in 2015. Fortunately, I don't have to imagine that. I have a panel of experts here who can do that for me, and that's what they'll be discussing over the next hour. I hope anyone watching will join the conversation too. Here's how. Follow IBM Pure Systems at IBM Pure Systems on Twitter. Tweet a question and use the hashtag IBM Pure Chat. That's hashtag IBM Pure Chat. We'll do our best to answer the question live. And for now, let's meet our panelists who will be joining us. With me today is Rohit Mehra from IDC. He's the Vice President of Network Infrastructure. Hello, Rohit.
Hi.
We also have Adam Gunther from, there we go, Adam Gunther from IBM. He's the Program Director of Cloud Offerings, WebSphere Project Management. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me.
And we're also joined by Brad Hertenstein, the Worldwide Brand Leader for IBM Software at Panelists. Hello, Brad.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And also we have Dan Colonese, a WebSphere Managing Consultant for Lighthouse Computer Services. Hi, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And finally, the man who will moderate this whole discussion for us is Nick McCrory. He's the new Technology and Integration Architect and Redbook's Thought Leader. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Louis. Hello, everyone. I think this is the first time any of us have actually gotten to meet each other, so we should have a fun conversation. Let's get right into it. As Louis has said, before we can look forward, let's look back. So I want to give everyone a chance to reminisce and look back at 2014, and just tell us about what you think were some of the surprises in 2014, some of the things you knew were coming, and what was the big thing in 2014 in terms of hybrid cloud. Let's start with Adam.
Hey, thanks. So what's the surprise for the year? So I would say, the thing that I think was most interesting this year was the explosion of containers, and namely Docker. I mean, I think a lot of us have been following the platform as a service space, container-based platforms. Obviously, we launched IBM Bluemix around that. But the explosion and the adoption in the community with Docker, I think in particular, is fueling hybrid cloud and brings us to the discussion today. Because I think enterprises are starting to notice, hey, if I unleash the power of containers, I can get very agile, fast, and nimble. Oh, no, but I've also got these existing systems, and I need to move those workloads into cloud, and that's where the end-based cloud, bare metal, pure application fits in. And now they want to use those together, tie them into on-prem, and I think it really sets us up for a hybrid conversation moving into next year.
Can you tell me a little bit different, when you say container, what's the difference between a container and a pattern, for instance?
So it's a little bit of an apple and an orange question. But so with a container, typically, right, we started with physical systems. And as we evolved, we started to virtualize the infrastructure. So I could take a large physical machine and carve it into little virtual machines and start to get multi-tenant with my hardware. Containers start to take that to the next level, and you're actually virtualizing little pieces on top that can then drop in on top of either virtual machines or bare metals. So what you get is you're packaging kind of, as you start to think of it in the application space, you're taking an application, a runtime, the operating system, and a little nimble piece, and then you're sharing more of the system underneath it. So it's more multi-tenant, but with that you can start to get kind of more scale around. I think patterns, and as we talk about it in the context of pure application, is more about how you encapsulate topologies and deploy those. So they're a little bit independent of each other.
Interesting. Interesting. I'm just going to go down my my screen here. How about Brad? What was surprising and the most interesting thing about hybrid cloud from 2014 so far?
Well, I had a a take on it, kind of when I was reminiscing about it, thinking that it was a little bit of trying to interpret what the disruption was. We're seeing a lot of that from our customer set. And when I look at the customers that we've worked with over the past 18 months in this space, we've seen that they've done a lot of experimentation. They're trying to become early adopters. They're getting a lot of various messages from a lot of different influence points. So, I mean, just to name a few culprits, if you say the word blue, for example, it means different things to different people. It might be sky blue, it might be royal blue, navy blue. It is very context specific, and this was no different for pure applications and patterns, as it were. So the context here is that the customers are trying to feel their way through. They're trying to understand the different messages that they're seeing from the different vendors and figure out exactly what makes sense for them relative to the system aspirations that they have, as well as the actual business connotations and the cost of ownership. So I think it's 2014 is kind of that interpretation of the disruption of the technology that they've seen, and now that we're getting like another wave of that with the next wave of patterns, they're starting to see more like the conversation that Adam was saying between the container versus pattern. They're starting to get more prescriptive about how they're actually going to be able to build these things in the middleware space so that they can build these things on demand, giving them more flexibility versus using just a all-in-one kind of container type of approach.
Interesting. Dan, surprises from 2014?
Well, I agree with Adam that containers have taken off in popularity. Maybe you're aware of Weave Networks, which is delivering Docker containers over the network in a non-local fashion. And I agree with Brad that on the enterprise front, you're seeing a lot more, the big vendors, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and IBM gaining traction, gaining wallet share, being able to, put new workload or direct their client spending, onto cloud services. So whether it's the, Smart Cloud versus Office 365 or the various platform as a service that launched this year. Certainly, there's great disruption around the edges, like Docker and Weave, and Google putting Docker on their compute platform, I think was a big validation of that. And then there's, slow and steady adoption in the enterprise and, in the business space. So I can't say I was surprised by anything in 2014. It's been a continuation of long-running trends.
Well, and do you see sort of the collaboration between these large cloud providers and partnerships between these large cloud providers helping to sort of settle that disruption as we get the standards in cloud computing?
I didn't know until recently that it's a violation of IBM's licensing terms to run IBM software in a computer you don't own or on a premises you don't own. And I think this is true for a lot of vendors that have had their software deployed on co-location and shared hosting services for years. So the announcement between Azure and IBM for cross support, as well as the pending compatibility announcements between various other cloud providers. I think it's a good thing, and there's going to be wide-ranging implications as, at least in the enterprise space, the cloud market consolidates a little bit.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. As it can only be goodness for our customers. Rohit, look back at 2014. What were some of the surprises, some of the happy moments?
Sure, Nick. Happy to chime in. I think we're going through a very interesting phase of the overall evolution of IT. And when I look back at 2014, what I see is basically two different dimensions sort of coming together. One is how private and public cloud have evolved over the last 5 to 7 years. And certainly, we've seen those in fits and starts, and with initially public cloud taking off, then private cloud taking off, and then a little bit of kind of slow growth in public cloud over the last couple of years. So we've seen those zigs and zags. But in parallel, we've also been seeing IT, enterprise IT, really evolving and really getting a grasp on what we call hybrid IT, or the hybrid IT environment. I'm not yet on hybrid cloud yet, so just stay with me for a second. And when I talk about hybrid IT, I'm talking really about IT looking at SaaS and PaaS and infrastructure as a service and so on. So it really, and then whether you run it all on your infrastructure versus hosted and colo and whatnot, I mean, it's a massive world out there and somewhat daunting for a lot of IT folks. But when you start to bring this hybrid IT environment out and start looking at cloud, private versus public, that's where I see kind of the culmination of events giving rise to a real-world hybrid cloud IT, or sort of thinking of it as a hybrid cloud launch. So 2014 for me is a significant year in the sense that this is where hybrid cloud starts to take off, leveraging the initial growth of public and private. That's number one. There's one more, if I may talk about, is really what's happened with infrastructure over the last year or two that's actually going to help enable hybrid cloud. And that is the coming together of infrastructure in terms of compute, in terms of storage, but also in terms of networking. And we know that networking was sort of late to the table, and no wonder discussion around SDN and NFV and all that in the last year or two. But the fact that networks are on the table, have a seat on the table, along with your compute folks and the application folks, and now you can really start to evangelize and go back and forth between public and private almost seamlessly. So second point in terms of why hybrid starts to go in a positive, really positive direction from here. Not as a hype, not on paper, but I'm talking of real-world deployments.
Oh, absolutely. And again, you can't have a hybrid cloud without having that link, from security to latency to performance that is the network. I mean, the network is what is the glue that holds the public cloud and the hybrid cloud or the private cloud together to make a hybrid cloud. So, Adam, a lot of companies, really went all in for public cloud in 2014. Do you think that's going to be a trend to continue, or do you think there's really going to be this pullback and go, no, actually, we still need to put some on-prem resources into the enterprise?
So I think all in is probably an extreme term, and you never really hear extreme terms with the enterprise. I think what I'm hearing from CIOs that I talk to is a recognition of not hybrid as a stepping stone into the future. It is part of that, but hybrid as a reality to how they will implement cloud long term. And by that I mean there's use cases where they see the public cloud fitting in. Smaller non-critical applications, initial development, prototyping. It's a low-cost way to get going quickly. I think they see uses for, we actually just announced as this chat was starting our dedicated, isolated private Bluemix, which is a brand new offering where, taking advantage of the capabilities of SoftLayer, we can deploy a customer their own instance of Bluemix. So they're going off-prem, but it's a form factor that works for the enterprise. They see use cases for that. Then there's certain regulatory issues still, or privacy issues, or some of it's just stubbornness, where you'll still continue to see on-premises cloud deployments. I think you're going to see more and more of a trend as we've been seeing towards the expert integrated systems and things like peer application system to make that really easy to do on-prem. And let's face it, the mainframe has been around for 50 years. It's going to be around for 50 more. So continuing to be able to expose that, integration technologies, API management is going to be key to enable. So I don't know, I say all in with public, but I now see that becoming a cornerstone of everyone's strategy.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And in fact, when it first dawned on me as to one of the reasons that you'll probably always have on-prem compute was a little more pedantic. I was playing golf, and I was teamed up with someone who I'd never met. He turned out to be an engineer for the city we live in, and when he found out what I did, he just went on a rant about how crazy this whole cloud thing was, because apparently every evening he was required to upload his very large engineering files to the public cloud and then download them every morning, as were all the other engineers in his office. So all of a sudden, from 9 a.m. until noon, no one could get any work done. And then the same thing basically happened from 3 o'clock to 5. So it just crunched the time that they could actually get any work done. Dan, do you see any other, again, maybe perhaps less pedantic or less silly examples of why you'll always still have, or at least for the foreseeable future, still have on-premise compute? Dan, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. I mean, in my view, it's always going to be more cost-effective to buy and operate your own computer at a certain scale. And, that bar has been shifting these last few years. And unlike probably the other panelists, I work with a number of, small and medium businesses. And it's the businesses on the real small side that are effectively killing their data centers. And we've had a few small clients, effectively close out their co-location or close out 90% of their on-premise environment. Operating above a certain scale, and certainly in the, the scale of the Fortune 1000, which is IBM's client base, it's never going to pay from a business risk, from a business continuity, to, move everything critical onto someone else's computer. So I think the line of how big of a business do you need to be to operate your own data center, how large of a shop and what kind of services you need to be providing before you're in the IT business and you have IT staff and assets you own. I think that bar is going to continue to move, and in a lot of industries, you'll see the big players turn to a private cloud or a hybrid model where they become their own service provider and buy lower level services from big vendors, and then you'll see a lot of the small market frankly go away and turn to SaaS services or traditional hosting services, which I think have gotten a lot stronger in the last year.
So, Brad, to you next. I see your mute button's on. I'll give you a chance to take it off. So, in 2014, many business leaders, pushed the move to public cloud, mainly for their systems of engagement. Do you see, that the public cloud being primarily an arena for systems of engagement, or do you see something more, whether it's systems of record or other, resources being moved into the public cloud?
I think we're going to get more and more movement of that towards systems of record. We're seeing some very interesting things, also around the the big data front, and just looking at what data needs to reside where within your network is a key factor. But we still have, it's interesting that we were talking just a moment ago. Daniel was talking about the smaller companies versus the larger ones, and there still are reasons such as data security, regulatory requirements, and frankly even just legal requirements for where data resides. And I think that's going to play a large part of where it is. But as we get more granular with this new type of cloud model, we're going to see new paradigms created with the integration of the different layers of a solution. And as we get more prescriptive with this, I think it's patterns will become more of a pervasive type of approach, because you can get more granular with where you put things via using patterns. So that's going to evolve over the next couple of years and help alleviate that situation. But for the time being, systems of engagements, looking at your CRMs and those kinds of things, we've obviously got a really good track record with or Salesforce.com has a good track record of doing some of those kinds of things. There's other CRMs that are out there as well, like Sugar and a few other ones that have done those kinds of things. And that type of data where it's less important for it to be in the cloud, and there are less regulatory requirements around it. You don't have PCI requirements or HIPAA requirements around the data. Those kinds of things make it a lot easier for those types of industries to be accepting of it. I think it's going to be more or less still a problem for the near term for the financials and the insurance companies and those kinds of folks to get comfortable with that type of scenario, to be able to disconnect or disintermediate those different pieces of the infrastructure that would need to be done so to move more of those patterns into a systems of engagement type of model that would be in a hybrid cloud. But for all the reasons that Adam was speaking about, with the new offerings and the new use cases that are coming about, those are certainly the keys that are going to keep driving this, because we're seeing the economics underlying all of this is requiring our customers to be able to prototype rapidly and to prove out whether or not a particular idea has merit or not on a small scale. And once they can do that, and they don't have a 30, 90, 180-day lead time to put a system like this together, that's going to be able to see some rapid changes in the applications that they're able to put into the on-prem, off-prem hybrid type of model.
Wow, Brad, that's almost like an intellectual acupuncturist. You just hit all the soft spots. So let's go through those a couple at a time. So let's start with security, because everybody thinks it goes directly to security when they think of cloud. Rohit, can you tell us some of the things that you see happening in the near-term future to alleviate the worries that business leaders have on the security of their data in the network?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, Nick, and to piggyback on the discussion that we were just having in terms of systems of record and systems of engagement, and link that with sort of security, and then look at where exactly are we. So if we look at the hybrid cloud model, and we know that the reason why we are continuing to look at hybrid cloud is because for a variety of reasons, financial, technological, cultural, security and regulatory and compliance reasons as well, and in many cases organizational reasons, that we've kind of, I shouldn't say stalled, but we are in a kind of a holding pattern as we go towards a full embrace of the public cloud by itself. So I think from that perspective, having the right mix of public and private, and security is one of those key attributes to consider when it comes to enterprise IT, in terms of where and how they want to move the needle and at what pace they want to move the needle. So we are in that multi-year phase of transition of hybrid cloud, and I think from that perspective, some of the country regulations and inter-country handling of traffic and what regulations are around that are going to be important, but also from a security standpoint, it's also a comfort level, and that's where I believe enterprise IT needs to bring in the lines of business, your LOB managers, because as you know, and we've seen this with a lot of our clients, the more the LOB managers work closer and closer with enterprise IT, I think that's for the betterment for the entire enterprise population. Right? Because you are also factoring in how fast and at what scale the lines of business want to move, but also the reality of where and how the IT organization is in position to support some of those business goals. So really, business meets IT, and then where you'll start looking at, okay, is security an issue for me? Again, based on the application need. Business and application come together hand in hand, and I think that's where security needs to be looked at. And of course, I can't talk less about security these days, given everything in the media is around security. No question.
And I think number one, I think security is always going to be an issue. I mean, it's just the world we live in. It's the world we've always lived in. It was always an issue before computers. Just because we have the advent of digital doesn't mean security goes away. In fact, it gets enhanced. But my take on this has always been that, yes, there are some high-profile instances involving celebrities in public cloud security, but there have been just as many more serious security breaches more recently on-prem environments. So my take on it is that public cloud, or at least large-scale enterprise public clouds, are being managed by security teams that are the best in the world. So you're more likely to be more secure on a public cloud than you are managing it yourself. Now, again, if you have a service provider, high-skilled service provider managing it on-prem for you, that's an entirely different issue. Dan, sorry. Your take on right now? We'll stick with security in the cloud, and we'll move on to geographic regulations in just a minute.
Yeah, of course. In 2008, Lighthouse launched a access and identity management platform on the cloud based on Tivoli Access Manager, Tivoli Identity Manager, TFIM. This really put us on the front line of what you were talking about, the cultural changes that have to occur for folks to trust the cloud, in this case with all their employee access and identity data. And really, starting in 2013 and certainly in 2014, we had a number of clients agree to bring their corporate directory as well as access and identity rights onto our cloud platform. So, I mean, nothing is really the crown jewels of your enterprise except for your access rights, your corporate LDAP, your passwords, and the fact that clients were, it was no longer, it stopped being difficult maybe a year to 18 months ago of selling people why they can trust us, why they should do this. And then, of course, IBM validated this strategy quite strongly in October when they acquired this cloud solution from us into the managed services group in GTS.
Okay. Sorry, just a little Google glitch when you stopped.
All right. Hopefully, I was talking about access and identity management in the cloud, which there's going to be great growth in. I mean, now that IBM owns our solution, and there's a number of other access and identity management solutions targeting the corporate space. I mean, this is just an extension of what people have been doing for years. Logging on with their Facebook accounts or trusting the cloud to manage their identity.
Yeah, well, again, before I go to Adam on that point, I saw recently of some security experts saying password reuse is the biggest bane in the industry. People reusing passwords on different points. We have too many passwords, people. We're human. We can't remember them all. That's why we reuse them. So, Adam, sorry. Again, take on security and security in the public cloud. Are people overly concerned with it? Clearly, the nightmare of any IT manager or CIO is to get a call at 3 a.m. and that there's been a breach. But again, is it any worse in the cloud than it would be on-prem environment?
No, I mean, I think I understand the hesitation. So the concern is right, and depending on who the person is on the other end, maybe they go to jail if they get this wrong. So I can appreciate that. You have two observations just listening to the conversation. One, I think we do a disservice when we refer to cloud too much as public. And I know we're referring to the public cloud, but I want to shift the conversation to off-premises versus on-premises. And off-premises doesn't necessarily imply public. I mean, that's really one of the things we've always been excited about, and what attracted us to SoftLayer is the ability to do private clouds, do isolation, do bare metal, and provide that as a service. We've got, FISMA compliant data centers with SoftLayer. We're able to sell into the federal government, and I think that that's just something. There's going to be time for regulations to catch up. But once you get past some of those security hurdles, and we do that with our pure application service, deploying into private SoftLayer environments, we're seeing now clients excited about that, taking system records and moving them off premises in a private zone. So I think we need to kind of look at both ends of the coin there. And I really see off premises private. I think there's going to be an explosion there over the next few years.
Well, I would. This is Rohit here. I wanted to jump in. I cannot agree more with what you just said, because I think no hybrid cloud discussion should be complete without a review of what's off-premise versus what's on-premise. There are enough private cloud models that can be off-premise as can be on-premise. No question about that. So whether you are, it's a hosted cloud or service provider-based managed cloud, etc. But the point is, it has to be a mix of many of these, and then your security discussion needs to happen based on what type of model you are going with. I think that's the only piece that I wanted to interject with, but I'm completely on board with what Adam just said.
Well, completely agree. And then my other thought is that's the cloud. Sometimes an afterthought is the application security. And I think you're going to see a renewed focus across companies of educating their developers and looking for help from vendors like IBM and others to help them develop secure applications. So we have services, if I pick Bluemix as an example, that help scan mobile applications, help scan applications to give reports to developers to help them build secure applications. Because it doesn't matter how secure the cloud is under the cover, if the front end isn't, there's potential for breach.
Yeah, and let me jump in there for a second too. It's really important to understand from a cloud perspective, really what a cloud data center is providing you is shared resources, or at least offloading the management of it. So it has a different kind of value proposition for a small organization versus a large one. But over the life cycle of an individual application, it's kind of the same thing. Because you're going to start with something small, figure out if it works. Hopefully, you can go and change the world with your app or your program, your website, be able to take it and scale it up. And you need a clear, seamless way and to actually be able to project that over the application's lifecycle. And I think that's where we start to struggle a little bit, because we don't know procedurally how we're going to handle that as it plays against the dynamics of a growing organization, or how it goes with the current investment stream. And I think those are some of the things that are starting to work its way out. And one of the things that we're seeing from the enterprise side, and just to kind of throw this into the mix a little bit too, is that a big part of the value proposition, especially for the larger enterprise companies, is around the SDLC. And being able to understand and optimize what investments you need to make in an SDLC to be able to take something from a small incubatory state and grow it into something larger. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the interest coming from the enterprise side. Well, and again, I want to thank you guys for kind of reeling that in a little bit, because you're right. You're absolutely right. The difference between a public cloud and a private cloud isn't necessarily on-prem or off-prem. It's the use of dedicated, isolated resources versus the use of shared resources. And so, Rohit, I actually wanted to give you a chance to come back to the geography, because the reality is it might all be in the cloud, but that cloud, that data has to be running somewhere. So again, there are going to be instances that and see as to where your workloads could run, and which cloud pod, if you would, your cloud can run on. But also there are going to be issues with regulations, governmental regulations, particularly in Europe, where information can't cross national borders. Can you give us a little insight as to what you think might change with any of that in 2015?
Yeah, great point, Nick. Let's start with this multi-country rollout of cloud, and how this might have an impact overall longer term on hybrid. Absolutely, you mentioned Europe, but let's not forget the regions of Latin America, and equally, if not more importantly, what's happening in Asia and Greater China and Japan, etc., where there are equal amount of questions and issues to be resolved as you roll out cloud across different countries in those regions. So, in North America, we probably don't have as many of those issues to consider, but if you look at it, and it's becoming, this whole world is becoming a smaller place, of course, for all of us geographically, we still need to consider each of those regulatory requirements from a country-to-country basis. So where your data centers are located versus where your users are is going to have a bearing on what applications can be rolled out. So again, it comes down to an application-specific view of how you will leverage public cloud, or for that matter, hybrid cloud. The other, besides the, moving on from the country and the regulations standpoint, is also something that I'm seeing a lot more these days, is the performance requirements of cloud. And specifically nailing down, I'm talking about the latency requirements. So when you start talking about user response times, because one is what would users like to see in terms of response time, but the other is what is your latency between servers, between applications that may be hosted in different data centers. And that's the reason why even in as large as a country as the US where we live, there are large providers who are coming up with multiple data centers. You've seen the news from Facebook with their most recent, I believe it was somewhere in the Midwest in Ohio, where they came up with their most recent data center, or was it Chicago? But the point is, latency between data centers is going to become as much of a play when it comes to geographical requirements, whether it's within country or outside country, and that needs to play a role as well. And I think that will lead the hybrid discussion when we start talking about the wide area and what this means for cloud providers, especially for cloud providers such as you folks at IBM.
Well, Adam, I see you nodding your head vigorously. Clearly you think that the latency, not necessarily the latency, but the performance issue is a big one, as to where your customers are, and the ability of cloud to run in different pods, and again, kind of run active to different geographies. Do you think that is really one of the best parts of cloud?
Well, no, I think that's just application design in general, and I think the key word and what got me nodding was the focus on the application. I mean, that's what's going to drive how people customize and build the hybrid cloud. And that goes back to my comments at the beginning of why we're hearing from CIOs and businesses that they're going to have a mix of all these infrastructures, because there's different applications with different needs, different latency concerns, different security concerns. There's even differences between development and test environments for some of those, and that's really what's driving this hybrid world, and why I really believe that hybrid is not a precursor to full cloud. Hybrid is cloud.
Dan, again, I also see you nodding. So, can you tell us a couple of things? One, I guess, what's one of the primary things your customers come to you, when they're interested in cloud? What are some of the common questions? And again, do you see these geographic issues as one of them?
Well, as was said before, outside the U.S., the regulatory requirements. We saw Salesforce launch their first on-premise software product, precisely to address the data locality issue. IBM is taking the wise strategy to, own everything from, the land on up to the network. Although IBM divested themselves of their public ISP to AT&T a few years back. In this last year, we've become an Akamai reseller, precisely because there are so many consumer-facing applications that our clients say it needs to be faster. Anything that touches the customer. But on the other hand, just the machine-to-machine traffic that we've had a number of clients in the last year, come to us. Not really, on the other end of the user experience. The app on your phone needs to be fast. The site in your browser needs to be fast. Things like log aggregation and IT management and B2B traffic. Otherwise, machine-to-machine traffic doesn't need to be especially fast, and we've seen a lot of clients asking for those services. Take this ugly back-end stuff, and you host it, you manage it, and it's especially valuable when IBM can provide some content, make it scale for multiple clients. So That's where our sophisticated cloud customers are, asking for help. And then there's still a lot of folks like, do I go to Office 365 or do I, install the next version? Do I, keep running my email server? A lot of the mid-market is, is at the stage where, they're just killing their email server, their Office suite, they're, expanding their web meetings, their collaboration tools, and, they're starting to shop for mobile apps and those kind of services. So, it depends on where you are. But let's not forget most of what businesses do is, invisible machine-to-machine traffic taking place on the clouds today.
Yeah, that's more than I think. There's more of that than I think the public actually could possibly imagine. Just the sheer volume of traffic going on between data centers and within a data center. Brad, what do you see as some of the barriers, or at least perceived barriers, to cloud computing that will be going away in the near future?
So one of the things that I see happening is that, and this is continuing on the same conversation that we were just having around the data center and location. I do see that the data centers are going to be increasing, so we'll have more interesting use cases for high availability, for failover, for DR types of scenarios. All of those scenarios, at least if we're looking at pure applications as the on-prem solution, are somewhat encumbered by a distance between data centers issue, and obviously resulting, from the speed of light equation, the physics of it just seem to make a little bit of a challenge there. But I think that's going to go away to an extent through some capabilities of the technology. One thing that I found very interesting with IBM's acquisition of Vespera, to be able to help move large volumes of data from one location to another. Now, I don't think that's going to get you to near-time or real-time replication, but it will allow you to get a lot more data down the pipe between greater distances, and that will make more things like high availability and failover a lot easier to be able to consume in a large type of web environment. And I think that's going to continue to progress as we see these enterprise applications have those requirements and some of the regulatory issues start to work themselves out over time.
Yeah, again, you can't get around the speed of light, but you can make protocols less chatty. And I think that's one of the things that has plagued the internet since the days of academia and ARPANET. Adam, I see a conversation about on-ramp versus cloud. Do you see going forward cloud not being the next big thing? It's just simply the way we go to business.
Yeah, and I think that time's actually starting to be here. So a lot of companies haven't executed on that yet, but I can't remember the last time I talked to anybody about what they're doing next, and cloud is not the way that they're going to develop and build applications. I think what you're going to start to see emerging next is APIs and API management, and both from the perspective of helping organizations govern and control access to all of these systems as things get decomposed into microservices. Being able to control them becomes important. And then the developer consumption, being able to consume things in natural ways, have native SDKs in the languages that you need, and really trying to make hybrid cloud a reality. And the other part that comes up, I just thought of in the last piece of the conversation, the big barrier I still see is more organizational than technological. So whether it's siloed development and IT teams and bringing that together to DevOps, whether it's how you deliver content and being able to do like what Netflix of the world do with canary testing and A/B testing, slow rollouts, to how you procure software and getting away from capital expenditures into operating expenditures and rental versus buying. I think that's the big hurdle that now that the technology is starting to get there and companies have that strategy, that I think people are going to tackle next.
I agree. It's kind of a generational change, not necessarily in human generations, but more in terms of the involvement of the technology. As developers, start to develop applications cloud first rather than trying to port them to cloud. I think it's just going to be like breathing. It's just going to be natural. Do you think, I guess, for Brad, do you think the advent, or at least the market penetration of software-defined environments, the ability to have push a button, if you will, a virtual button, and have 14 different images all pre-configured with your security hardening, with your build on them, your applications installed, your licensing, your business processes, all ready to go to launch an application. Do you see that as one of the biggest driving forces, both with the pure app suites as well as cloud computing?
Actually, I do. I think that's going to be a tremendous value to our enterprise customers, and certainly for the customers that have gotten to a certain critical mass, for them to be able to take that next step forward. I do think that one of the things that you have to say about patterns and with any middleware, certainly at this point, is that the time savings is not necessarily on the first implementation. The time saving is on everyone afterwards. So you still have to do some due diligence around the middleware. So if you pick like a WebSphere application server, pick your middleware that you want to talk about, you still have to understand how to deploy it within your configured environment, but you will be able to see how to deploy that your way every time thereafter, so that when you put up another development instance or when you put up a testing instance, you can put it up and take it down within a certain time window and be able to manage your software licensing around a much more rental type of economics than you would be otherwise by using that type of metaphor. So I think it will continue those paths, and it will continue to evolve and on both the customer side as well as from the vendor side, because a lot of the programs themselves of the software licensing and the ownership are going to evolve as well.
Yeah, and also on the compute side, you'll see the ability of, say, SoftLayer to have systems up and running by the hour or by the week. Will also lend value to that type of model. Rohit, how about software-defined networks? I mean, I know that's going to be, it's not the next big thing. It's happening now. But can you tell us a little bit more about how software-defined networks come into play?
Absolutely. What started in, when I talked to IT folks and even across the industry at conferences when I speak, one of the things I draw an analogy to would be what happened with server virtualization, more than a decade ago, and how we've all changed the way we do IT today, right? The same thing sort of is being replicated in many ways with how we've started thinking about network virtualization as well. Storage too, but certainly your question is more around SDN and how SDN plays a role within this broader software-defined environment. And I think network virtualization really brings that next level of agility to IT environments, both public and private cloud environments as well. And I think from that perspective, SDN and network virtualization will play a pivotal role in how we start to deploy hybrid clouds as well, because now you're talking about similar templates and really linkages between the network and the applications that never existed before. And I'm hoping that some of the panelists, along with me, Adam, Brad, etc., will kind of resonate and at least think on similar lines, because I'm very passionate about how finally networks will come up to the task or step up, if you will, and really enable this next generation of IT and hybrid. Keep in mind, I know before we get caught up in this, transition to hybrid, let's be aware that over 50% of enterprise IT spend still goes to traditional IT and private cloud, right? So we have a long way to go before that gradual transition moves over into public and hybrid. So, which is certainly a great opportunity for vendors in this space, and an opportunity for IT as well to rise and shine and basically showcase what they can bring to the table in terms of LOB needs. So from that perspective, I think software-defined networking is going to be key as well.
Oh, I agree. And Adam, I did kind of set this one up for you to come back to containers that we talked about earlier, and to tell us, how do patterns and containers, relate, basically work into the software-defined environment and network-defined environment.
Well, I mean, the one thing I just wanted to go back to the networking. I mean, I think why that's absolutely critical, and we have to solve that and address that now. I mean, you hear our chairman, Ginny Rometty, say often that data is the new natural resource, and the amount of data that's flowing around. I mean, just look at the whole controversy over Netflix and bandwidth, and that's just people trying to watch a movie in their home. If we don't, as a global industry, solve the networking problem, we're going to be having lots of problems. We're not going to get the full value out of things. I look at containerization, patterns, virtualization. All those things are abstractions of what happens with the software-defined networking below the covers. So the emergence of platform as a service, things like Cloud Foundry and Bluemix, is to keep developers away from all of that stuff. So that's the beauty of it. It's I can take an application on my desktop that runs a Java app with a database, and in a couple of clicks and 30 seconds, I've got a whole infrastructure set up in the cloud running. As a developer, that's hugely powerful. And that's the beauty of it. It just abstracts all of that guts out of the developer mindset, and really makes things accessible that weren't before. So when I think about patterns, services, I was talking with a very small company, earlier this year, a handful of people, and they're using IBM Cloud, started to use the Bluemix in this example. And I asked them, and I said, we don't typically attract small businesses like you. We always try, but we don't. Why IBM? And they said something which I thought was very powerful. They said, as a small business, I've always been just very attracted to your analytics portfolio. I love what it can do in theory. I can't afford to procure it, and even if I could, I don't have the manpower to set it up, operate it, worry about all the things that Rohit was just talking about. So now being able to get that consumption-based as a service, really as an API in the cloud for developers, you now take what was previously unreachable by the masses, and it's reachable to the masses. And that's what really excites me about cloud, because the innovation that you'll see when now this technology is accessible by more brain power, it's not just the applications. I mean, think of some of the serious problems when you start to apply Watson to cancer research and you start to think about the progress of society. I mean, that's really what gets me excited.
Dan, again, to come back to what Adam was saying and Jenny's comment that the compute will be, the new national resource, or data is the new national resource. Do you see us getting to a point, because everybody talks about cloud computing as utility computing. That's kind of how, the original term for cloud computing. But it occurs to me when you plug an outlet or plug into an outlet, you don't know what power plant generated that power. You don't know if it was nuclear, coal, or natural gas or solar. Do you see us getting to a point where we have a national data grid? I mean, to get there, again, and come back to the question I think I asked you earlier about, do you see the collaboration between companies, large cloud providers, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, being key to basically making that almost invisible to the end user or the consumer, which in our case are enterprise vendors. And again, do you see having to be able to, as a service provider, be able to be cloud agnostic, be able to manage clouds, various different vendors, whether or not, again, without your end user, which cloud it's running on?
My first job for IBM was at the North Carolina Compute Grid, where IBM had an initiative with several of the universities and companies in North Carolina to have a statewide grid, mostly for bioinformatics workload as a public utility in North Carolina. That's when we called it the grid. Now we call it the cloud. And it's, there's been a lot of comparisons made. Like Nicholas Carr wrote a book comparing the move towards cloud services like Google equivalent to the electrification of America and General Electric bringing in power lines into everyone's home a century ago. Where this breaks down is applications and IT needs are a lot more diverse than these standard services that we can deliver as a utility. And certainly on the the platform end, what a medium compute instance in Azure versus a medium compute instance in SoftLayer versus what one looks like in Amazon or another provider is becoming very comparable. I think because application workload, business context, and there's just a tremendous more amount of complexity here than than we're willing to acknowledge. Then we're going to get to the day where you can interchangeably plug into different cloud providers in a seamless manner. I think we've been promised that for a long time, and there's a lot of complex obstacles to getting there. I really resonated with what Adam was saying, that from a developer standpoint, from an end user standpoint, there's magic. We don't want users doing build, config, deploys and installs anymore, and I think that's that's closer to the fundamental change than a true utility that non-technical people can plug into. Moving consultants like myself, moving and Brad up a level. Brad, you and me have good businesses doing install and deploy and config services, and it's a little scary to think the cloud might take that away from us. But in the long term, that's for the best when when we're able to devote our attention, our energies to solving some of these tougher integration problems. The infrastructure stuff's going to become a utility, but the full solution, never.
And I would agree. I think that can be seen in consumer electronics today. Again, the full solution, whether it's the computers we work with or the electronic products we use, are really what the end users are most concerned with, and that's where I think most businesses should focus. Lewis, I think we are close to the top of our hour. I know you like to do a speak tweet. I'll throw that back to you.
Thanks so much. And so this last question is for everyone, and I'll just go in order of my screen here. It's called Speak Tweet for, we're looking for brevity here, a little conciseness, if you will. So in 1 to 2 sentences, if you can finish this sentence. In 2015, hybrid cloud will, Adam, your thoughts?
Be the de facto standard for enterprise IT.
Oh, all right. And Nick, I just hit on your screen actually, so we'll jump to you. So finish that sentence, please. In 2015, hybrid cloud will.
Oh, be the new normal. It's just again, I think it already is, but I just don't think that most people realize it yet.
Rohit, in 2015, hybrid cloud will.
That's a tough one, but I'll go this way. A hybrid cloud will become pretty much a go-to option for enterprise IT to consider if they have not considered it yet.
Great. And Dan, same question to you. Finish this sentence. In 2015, hybrid cloud will?
Well, hybrid cloud will capture a lot of new workload in 2015. I hope we can all agree.
All right, and Brad, last but not least, finish the sentence. In 2015, hybrid cloud will.
Yeah, it will become the workload standard for development and test environments, and certainly in terms of the economics. And it will become primarily a reviewed scenario for production for enterprises.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. That was the best speak tweet that I've ever done on one of these. You have no idea how perfect that was, actually. That was everything I've ever wanted out of it. But I invite all of our viewers to continue the conversation on Twitter. You can continue to use the hashtag IBM Pure Chat for any questions, and we'll be sure to answer them long after this hour is over. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks.